Hi guys, in this episode, I had the chance to interview Jan van Lochem, CEO of Qserve. Jan has strong experience in quality compliance and regulatory affairs and business. So we had the chance to talk about his Rolls Royce strategy when it comes to problem solving and serving clients. What's more important, education or experience? And his experience adjusting through being a regulatory professional all the way through to being the CEO and running a business. Enjoy. Hello, everybody. We're back with another episode of Career Diaries by Elemed, the podcast dedicated to talking about careers in the medtech industry. And today I'm joined by Jan van Lochem, CEO of Qserve. Welcome, Jan.
Thank you. Thank you, Elena.
I'm really excited.
Very nice to be here.
It's been a long one coming as well, right? I mean, I've been following up with you for a while to get this in the diary. So I'm really excited to have the chance to actually speak to you about your career and learn a little bit more about your story, because today we're really talking about that transition from being a technical expert into business and running a business, which are two really different roles. But before we get into it, maybe you could just start with a brief introduction as to who you are and what you do.
So my name is Jan van Lochem. I live in the Netherlands. I'm currently already for the past 10 years almost. I run as CEO of Qserve Group and a consulting group in regulatory quality and clinical, and a CRO in Europe, in different places, the US and in China. And like I said, now you say it, it's May 1st is my 10th anniversary. So that's coming up in a few days.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah.
I bet it's gone by in a flash.
Yes. I mean, you don't realize it. And I guess that's maybe with a lot of jobs, but also in our sector. I mean, there's been so much going on in the past 10 years. It's never a dull moment.
Yeah, exactly that. Where did it all start, though? Because it didn't start at Qserve, did it?
No. If I really go back, when I was younger, I wanted to study medicine. We have sort of a lottery system in the Netherlands. So I just had bad luck. I didn't pass it. So I went sort of, I thought, let's try engineering. So I went for biomedical engineering. So I thought, I also love this combination. I have something medical related, but then, also with technology. So studied that in biomaterials mainly. I graduated there and then got a job in R&D, like, a lot of people with that background start. And then at some point got into medtech R&D. And then these were, around mid-90s when the first European regulations, first the active implantable device directive, and then in 95 the medical device directive saw the light. And there were some emerging notified bodies, and also in the Netherlands, one called KEMA, which is now DEKRA. And they were looking for people with a biomedical engineering background as a product reviewer. So I thought that was interesting, and that's how I applied there, and that's how I got into the regulatory world. Because obviously, coming from R&D, I had no clue what regulatory was about really. And I very much remember reading the then medical device directive for the first time. Very boring, not having a legal background. But over time got more and more interesting. During that time, roughly, I also did an MBA and learned more from the business side. So for years, I acted as, learned to audit, acted as an auditor, product reviewer on European regulations. Did also some courses with FDA, as there were some MRAs between the US and Europe and Australia, etc. So learned about other regulations in those years as the Global Harmonization Task Force came up. They sent me to the US as we got more, the Netherlands being a small market. As a notified body, we looked outside the Netherlands internationally. So I learned that early on. So I spent a couple of years in the US, in Pennsylvania, in setting up notified body operations there. Then they asked me back after a couple of years to go further into management positions until I was global head of their medical division there. And then I moved at some time, just before they were acquired by DEKRA, I moved to BSI to help establish BSI in mainly continental Europe and Asia. And I spent 5 years there, and then by then I had moved already from being involved heavily in the regulations and having an more operational role in doing audits, doing product reviews, into a more business managerial role. So that evolved as I was more responsible for setting up for BSI. And then in 2014, they got this opportunity of a small consulting group that asked me, the founder thought about retirement and wanted the company to continue, and asked if I wanted to join as CEO. And I knew at that time, 2014, I had, on behalf of BSI, on and off, been involved in Brussels in the formation of the MDR and the IVDR. So I knew what was coming. I knew how that would impact the whole sector. So I thought also from a consulting side, that must be an interesting journey, because the industry will have a lot of challenges and will need help. I thought, so instead of having a long career on a notified body side, it would be interesting to, as a consultant, to be on the industry side and learn there and continue his journey. So that's where I'm at now. And as and also as the company, as Qserve grew bigger, you get less involved into the practical operational side with customers as a consultant, and like what I do now, I'm just a CEO. It's purely on the business side.
Just the CEO. I love how you how you're so humble about that, and I'm interested to go more into how you see the role of CEO as well in a sec. But there's so much to unpack from what you said about your early journey into regulatory and moving into that notified body, and I'd really love to go a little bit deeper. You spoke about kind of starting in R&D and having that transition then into kind of like a little bit more regulatory. So how did having an R&D background help you in regulatory?
Oh, I would say throughout my career, and it's sometimes if I look at my education, so I've had an engineering, I did a master in engineering, and then later on also an MBA in business, and I've always, I certainly in my current role felt like, I do much more what I learned in that MBA than what I learned at university in engineering. But sort of on the background, I mean, throughout my career in the roles I've had, you have so much interaction with customers, and customers love to tell about their product.
Yeah.
That's been, when I was an auditor, later on as in more management roles, and you engage when there's issues, problems, and they ask you to intervene. But also as a consultant, people like to talk about their products. They're proud of that, and that's always interesting. I mean, you're at the front of innovation, and then you don't always realize that. But when you talk regulatory, what I try to learn to people that I coached, trained, I always start with saying, if you want to understand regulatory, the first questions you need to answer for yourself is, what is the technology? How does the product work technically, as much as possible? And what does it do clinically, inside, on the body, whatever? And if you understand those aspects, then the rest is a path you walk regulatory-wise, because that determines the classification. Then you can understand, okay, what are the main risks here that I need to address and where I need to focus on, etc., etc. So understanding the product as an engineer, I think, unconsciously has helped enormously, while not always realizing that in the daily life.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because when I first started recruiting regulatory, so people that at that point were kind of like in the middle of their career, so let's call it like manager, senior manager, kind of director level, most of them had come from an R&D background. It was very rare to find people that had like their first ever job was in regulatory and they followed regulatory like all the way through. It was rare. So they came from R&D. Maybe they were quality and did a little bit of reg, or maybe legal, but often they were coming from a slightly different background and then found this path into regulatory affairs. Whereas now we've seen regulatory become a lot more, I would say, kind of like mature as a career path. So there's a lot more career pathways for graduates to even study regulatory affairs like formally and then go and pick that as a career route. And I'm interested in your take on whether you think that would be a better route and what advice you might have for someone that's chosen, okay, I'm studying right now regulatory affairs, that's going to be my career route. Because obviously there's been so many learnings that you've had by having a slightly different background. What advice would you have for people that maybe have said, I'm just going to go regulatory all the way?
Well, one of the things I learned throughout my career as a manager, I've hired a lot of people. And then you look critically at profiles and what are you looking for? I mean, you need to think deep about that, talk to people. But ultimately, I've always learned that people with different backgrounds not only support each other and complement each other, because ultimately it's about behavior of people. And and also now in Qserve, we work, most of our people have a technical or a clinical background, but we have also some people with a legal background that got into, from that angle, into regulatory affairs, and they really miss that sometimes, that technical background. But then working as a team, I mean, we solve that. And then you see the ones that excel, it's more about their behavior in, how they set a goal for themselves, are solution driven, and how we can, in their education and building experience, how we can support that, rather than that's what I thought maybe early on, also coming from an engineering background, that if you're not like engineer or anything, that it's hard to understand technology, and then you can be less successful in the regulations. But what I've learned over the years, regulatory is a very logical legal structure, and the fun is to play with it and to think about it analytically, and how to apply it. And then coming from a technical background helps, but I would say if that's not the case, and if you go straight into regulatory, it doesn't lead to more or less results. You can equally achieve the same, because in any setting you always need team members, colleagues, other stakeholders to work with, and then it's more important you learn how to work with others and put everybody in their strength, and as a team achieve a result, then that you need all that body of knowledge yourself.
Yeah, because it is a team effort ultimately, and that building that connection, knowing what you're good at, leaning into that, is really important. You said also a couple of times that you did an MBA, and that's super interesting because not everybody chooses to do an MBA. So I'm interested to understand, what made you say, hey, I'm going to do that instead of like more technical qualifications?
Well, it is also something I think I learned over the years, and also if I look at our current team, there's people that just by their character and interests have a more generic profile, if you will, and we have some people that enjoy going deeper into details. And like I said before, both is fine. You need both. And I didn't know up front early on, but I mean, if I look back, I'm more of the generalist type, apparently. So I've had an automatic, broader interest. And like, early on, when after I did my master's, I doubted, am I going to do a PhD? And it also says, like, ultimately I decided, no, I want to go to work. It's an amazing challenge to do a PhD, but I chose not to do it, because then they didn't go really deep. So somehow that's just me, that I have a broader interest, and also maybe how my father had a furniture factory. I was raised in sort of an entrepreneurial company that the business side has always interested me. And I got that opportunity somewhere in my career when they asked me to become a project manager, and picking up a bit of the commercial side, that prompted me to say, hey, then I want to invest in, my knowledge also on the business side, and the commercial side, to understand more of those processes. But I believe, looking at people, having dealt with people over the years, anything is fine. That's just me as a more generalist, interested in both of those sides. where we have great people in our team, and I've had it in previous companies, people that go really deep and are key experts that you need throughout projects.
So if we talk about the MBA, and let's just break it down, because like maybe we've got some listeners who know as at a high level what MBA stands for, but maybe don't really like know the details of what does it actually involve and why should somebody do it. So from your perspective, just high level, like what did your MBA cover and what did you take away from it that you've continued to use throughout your career?
Well, one thing for me was, and for me it was a great experience, even though by now it's a long time ago. But I did it after 5 years into my career, and I still remember the feeling of everything was so interesting because you learn about different aspects of a company, from corporate strategy to purchase management to human resources to marketing principles. And I graduated in business, in service marketing, which in the line of work that I'm in, selling services basically throughout my career, made sense. But you learn about all these aspects of a business, finance, of course. And like in any profession, there's parts that you enjoy more than parts that you enjoy less. But almost every course I was, so interested. I remember that just because I had a number of years of working experience. So I had an understanding, or at least a basic understanding after a couple of years, this is how a company works. And this is my place in it at that point in time. So everything got its place, rather than, when I did my engineering, it's you don't have that experience yet how it works in practice in the big world. So you learn about all the aspects of that most people recognize that you need to run a business. I guess back then IT wasn't like a big topic, and probably now it would be in MBA programs. And back then, when I was at a notable body and auditor, it has helped me, for instance, because in auditing, you audit business processes, basically. In regulatory and for compliance purposes, we call that quality system processes, etc. But in essence, if a company and a business is well integrated with its quality system or vice versa, you audit business processes. So also in my work back then, that was before starting to get into management, it helped me a lot in understanding, the different aspects of business processes and departments and how they work together and how they need each other. So it's been for me a great education to get a bigger perspective, basically, than at that time what I was working on specifically.
And so it's kind of like you're saying, it's like most valuable once you've had a little bit of experience already and you've kind of got some familiarity of like how a company's running. This will take it to the next level, and it gives you that broad overview of like how a company works. At the time when you decided to do the MBA, did you have a career goal of like, hey, I want to run a business later on in my career?
To be honest, no. It sounds silly, but I've always felt like it. I mean, I have what other people say about me. I'm competitive. I'm goal oriented. So it must be something in me that that gets to the outcome where I am today. But I've never had things like every 5 years I want to do something different, but more to develop myself, but not specifically. Oh, in 10 years' time, I want to be there exactly. But more like, hey, I want to continue to develop myself. And that's also why I chose and asked my company back then, do you support me in when I do an MBA? But I've always had the luxury of and sought that also to find a next job every couple of years.
So I wanted to ask you about education versus experience, because obviously you've got both, right? Like you're highly educated, you've got a lot of different qualifications, but then obviously, you're very practical and hands-on in the roles that you've had until now. But if you were hiring someone, or what advice would you have, let's say, for someone who, is like, should I just like jump in and get the experience of something that I don't have experience in, or should I first do a qualification, get a certificate, you know, in it, and then go and try and look for a job?
That's a tricky, well, not a tricky. It's a good question, because probably it's hard to answer because you need both. Everybody starts off with a certain level of education, obviously, and then ends up in a job. And I'm a lot of learning. I guess what everybody does is training on a job, as you learn. And also later on, I had leadership courses, etc. But they're always initiated because you get to a next job, or there's always a purpose related to it, or to support you better in your current job. So I think the practice is that it's initiated mostly from something you do, rather than saying, oh, I have this goal where I want to be in 5 years, so let's first get the appropriate education for it and then go.
Let me put it another way. So would you ever hire someone on the basis of a certificate, or on the basis of having done a specific course? No.
No. And of course it helps.
Yeah.
It's like what I said earlier. I think behavior and character of people are at least equal, if not more important. I see the education as the foundation. I mean, you need that. But to be honest, I don't. For instance, if I would have somebody that's graduated cum laude versus some with slightly lower grades, but I see that somebody has characteristics in terms of communication skills, dealing with other people. I mean, let's say all kinds of social skills, which are equally important to succeed in any business, and I guess in any job. I would give that more preference probably than purely a certain educational level.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really interesting because I was speaking to somebody the other day that also spoke about this, like from a leadership level, and actually, it's actually better, like, if you're average, you can capitalize on loads of like really good people and put them together in a team and make a really, really powerful team. Whereas if you just look to hire geniuses, it can be limiting because it doesn't necessarily mean that when you put them in the team together, that's going to gel and that's going to work in the way that you want it to work. So it's about like understanding, okay, what are the behaviors that you want and what are the characteristics that you want. And it's not just only about certificates. And the reason I bring this question to you is because a lot of people ask me, they reach out to me when they're early on in their career and they say, Eleanor, I want to get a certificate so that I can get a job. They've already done their degree, but it's like, I want to do an advanced certificate before I start applying to jobs. And my experience, having spoken to leaders all across the board, is that they hire for experience. They don't just hire for certificates. So try to get that first experience. And then once you've got a little bit of experience under your belt, maybe you want to specialize and go a little bit deeper like you did. But people don't hire people just on the basis of the qualifications that they have.
No, it's a basic requirement. It's a given based on somebody. You speak to somebody. I mean, with the right levels of qualification, obviously. But ultimately, then the rest is more important. It's about how does somebody come across? How are all these other skills? Because you always need to work in teams and with different stakeholders. And also in our current job, I mean, we work with customers, so that's an important element. I cannot have people. I mean, our people have great expertise, technically, regulatory-wise, clinical, whatever. But I cannot put them somewhere in a corner, or just working from home and not interacting at all. We interact with customers all the time to help them to listen. So are you a good listener? I mean, I have discussions with people about, hey, not every customer wants to build a Rolls Royce. We need to carefully listen for this particular product and for their business in terms of size or which markets they go to, what is really their need. And it's not always to make the perfect solution. Because there's budget constraints. I mean, everything takes time. So the ability to listen, to deal with that, and to adjust flexibly to what the needs of a customer are equally important to have a good outcome than having specific technical qualifications.
Really interesting. I like the concept of not everybody wants to build a Rolls Royce, because it's so true, actually, isn't it? And everybody have different preferences, different budget constraints, different timelines that they're working with. And actually, sometimes the solution that you need to provide, the solution needs to match what their expectations are versus a solution against the best perfect outcome that you could, what perfect looks like.
And to be honest, that is, just because you asked about the MBA, that's one. And it's probably a standard case in probably every MBA program. But way back, that's when I learned, and that's that principle about the Concorde. That was this supersonic plane that flew from London and Paris to New York and back in like 3 hours. And a message there was in a program saying, that was built by engineers, and those were, sublime engineers. They built a wonderful plane that could go transatlantic in 3 hours. But there wasn't really a market for it because they had forgotten to really do the research. Is there a need? Are people willing to pay so much money to get across the Atlantic in 3 hours? So it was never a really successful product. And that's, but within Qserve, everybody knows when I say, hey, not every customer wants a Rolls Royce. They know what I mean. Because that, and it's those aspects. I mean, the technical knowledge and the regulatory clinical knowledge is the basis. But the rest is all about, listening, being flexible, working with others, and behaviors. There's another, in one of the courses I did in the past, somebody said there's 3 aspects. There's content, so the knowledge. There's processes, so how do you make things efficient and what are the steps you take? And then there's behavior. And the companies that want to excel, and if you want to excel as a person, ultimately most important is behavior. Because everybody has a certain content, or you can acquire content, or you can, lend a hand by, somebody in a team. And the process that we can work out, the critical factor is usually behavior.
So how do you go about identifying and deciding, like, let's say you're interviewing someone, how do you go about determining behaviors?
We ask questions, and we have role plays that we do during interviews. And again, I mean, the basis also my current company, I mean, the basis is knowledge. And it's knowledge in the whole team of consultants and clinical project managers that we have that forms the basis. But during interviews, it's ultimately, it's talking to different people, doing role plays, making these color profiles of people to see what kind of character is it and how does it fit in a team. Those are for us the most important elements that we take into account.
What happens if you have someone that you really, really like, but then when it comes to like the role plays or the color profile, there's not a match? They look great on paper. They maybe have loads of technical knowledge, but then the other things aren't a match. What do you do? Do you still hire them?
Then probably, the first thing to do is verification with some other people. And if there's still doubt, then, I guess we've all learned, in case of doubt, don't do it.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that's a simple, because, and also, I mean, if I look, in my current role as CEO, then I'm also thinking money. And I think, when we say yes to somebody, we want it to succeed. I mean, if you feel moral obligation, we want anybody to succeed within our company, hopefully, and to excel and develop themselves. That's their interest and also our interest. But from both sides, you invest a lot of time in each other.
Yeah.
And that starts right away after hiring. If you would really capitalize that, and that in general, that's not always done. But if you translate, training on a job when somebody starts and before somebody really gets into his or her job effectively, and you would assess that, it's a lot of money if you would capitalize the time involved by the person itself, but also by seniors who coach, who help. So before, so at least in our business and the business I've always worked in, the major cost is staff cost.
Yeah.
The rest is almost immaterial. And so when hiring somebody, for us, that's that's almost like it sounds strange, but almost like a business case. You want to, you want to take a very careful decision in the interest of people, but also in the interest of the business, because from day one you're going to invest a lot of time from both sides.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which means to me, in case of doubt, then it's no. Then we wait a little longer.
That's really interesting, because not everybody would say that. And I think that, some people might say if there's doubt, maybe give it a try, maybe see what happens. But you see, that's like, I think when you're looking at it with your CEO hat as well, when you're looking at how the whole business runs, it's not just about that one individual, but it's about how they fit within the company and the
Exactly.
cost, not just the cost of their salary, but it's actually the cost to the company of making that hire, the investment that other people in the business will need to take to get them onboarded, to get them up and running, as well as like the obvious cost. There are a whole bunch of hidden costs.
Yeah.
So making a hire and getting it wrong can be hugely expensive, and then also can be also really damaging, on the longer term. So sometimes it is better to just not make that hire if you really have doubts. If you look at your career so far, Jan, then, so aside from that's a really good one. So like if you have doubts, it's probably a no. What are some of the other like bigger learnings that you've learned throughout your career?
Well, maybe the same, but I mean, I've always worked in people's businesses, huh? So in that sense, I don't have a full scope. I mean, in at least when I was in management functions, I've worked within notified bodies, which is a people's business, a service business, and also now in Qserve, which means it's all about people, and we all know that. But it's in line with what I just said. It's tough to manage people, because everybody's different. It's hard to make everybody happy, and I've learned. I mean, you can't make everybody happy, and certainly not in my position. That's just a given. I've certainly learned with in the profession we're in, we deal with highly educated people, colleagues, and they all have some level of bachelor to PhD level in whatever degree. And one of the things I learned throughout the years is micromanagement doesn't work. And I think that's very important, because people with a higher education need a level of freedom to do their job, and to make choices within the setting and the framework of a company and their function, their role. But they need freedom, and in order to give that and not micromanagement, the basis needs to be trust, unless proven otherwise. So for me, two big learnings are like no micromanagement and starting with trust. Because if that's not there and you want to start micromanaging, that's sort of the beginning of the end. Then something is not working. And how hard it is to listen to people, how important it is to listen to people, apart from content and the processes and what I do in my current role. Finance is a big part of my current role, whether I like it or not. And still every day I need to tell myself also, make time to listen to people, recognize people. At least the businesses I have experience with, people are the biggest asset. We must make time to make it work. And another thing I learned, I guess, in that place, maybe also back to the conversation we had earlier, the basis of in our profession, in the regulatory profession, is knowledge, and gaining knowledge and experience, like we said. But in the business I've worked in, I've learned through the years not to underestimate the marketing and sales side. You need the knowledge, but ultimately we can get that, by working in a team. Sometimes, hire that in. But interacting with customers and trying to convince them of your service and how we can make a difference. That's often underestimated. and certainly with regulatory professionals who are, by nature, are not always involved in the commercial side of things of businesses. But in the commercial processes, listening to clients, and then you come to the behavior again, is often underestimated. But also to find regulatory solutions, you need to start listening first, understand the product, understand the situation, and then apply the technical knowledge. And then you get to my Rolls Royce story, like, hey, it doesn't always have to be perfect. We need to listen first.
Need to give like a couple of different options, right? And kind of say like, this is the Rolls Royce solution, but this is the, I don't know, Ford Fiesta solution or whatever else. And you give them like a couple of different options, and then you're creating solutions as well as a service provider. This is like a super fascinating conversation. Go on, you were going to say something.
No, and I guess, I mean, that's how sort of bridging what I learned, back then in the MBA, and also applying that in practice in the regulatory world is like, in corporate strategy, you have these courses in MBA, and then you learn about, how you set objectives, and then you have to make a SWOT analysis, and then different strategic options, and then you make a choice, and then I go for this strategy. Also in my regulatory life, also applied that, because it's principally the same. I mean, regulatory is so interesting because the law forms a framework, but within that you have so many choices, and then it's important to focus, like, what is the problem I want to fix, and what is my objective? Do I have different strategies? Well, what are the risks? And in regulatory risk is different than business risk, of course, although there are similarities. But the principles of thinking analytically and then coming with, okay, this is the road I'm going to follow, are very much the same.
So we've spoken about your regulatory background. We've spoken about kind of the idea of like working in consulting. But what in your role right now as like CEO of a business, of a service-based business as well, because that's also different, isn't it? What would you say are some of the other main differences between being a technical regulatory professional and then being a CEO of a service-based business?
When I had a more technical and regulatory role, the scope is different because there's a clear goal. You have a clear job to sort of solve problems. When I was in a non-food body, also, to audit the company or to review a dossier for compliance and approval, it's a clear task for other people. And it's a clear assignment. You do it. There's a conclusion and you go on. And of course, there's complexities. There's all kind of questions you need to answer. It's potentially at a high level of expertise that you need to operate. That's what it is, and it's fulfilling. It's interesting because like I said, with regulations, I mean, there's a lot of room to interpret gray areas, and that's for me always been fun to play with and to find different solutions. When I now think of my job as a CEO, in a way, it feels sort of heavier in terms of responsibility, because it's instead of working for others and a clear goal with a clear scope, my role as CEO is to service the other people in the company, which maybe sounds strange a bit, but that's how I see it. If in a company like ours, our consultants are customer interfacing, they assist our clients, like our salespeople. So I want to make sure they're happy, that they do a good job. So I need to service them with the internal departments. But the scope of, as being a CEO, it feels like it's never something I can complete. Of course, there's projects to complete, but it's there's always a problem that pops up that doesn't belong in somebody's function, and then it ends up with me. And then I feel responsible. Yeah, I mean, if there's nobody else, I need to pick it up and somehow solve it. So it's the responsibility feels heavier.
Yeah.
And it's fine. Yeah, it's just at a different level. It's not working for customers, for others, but it's more working on a personal level. You feel that responsibility more.
Yeah. I was listening to another podcast the other day, and basically the lady said, like, a CEO is basically, your job as CEO is you go out and you hire the best possible, most intelligent, smart people you can find for the roles that you have within your business. And then you empower them to go and to use their skills, knowledge, to do the best possible job that they can. But then when the best possible people that you hire find problems that not even they can solve, they bring them to you. And so your job as a CEO is to problem solve the problems that the brightest, smartest minds that you've tried to hire into the company still can't even solve. And so therefore, if you think that your job as a CEO is anything more than just a glorified firefighter or problem solver, it's not. Like, it really is just dealing with different problems and challenges and keeping everything moving and keeping your people happy and keeping the business going forwards. It is a high pressure role. So I thought that was a really interesting analogy when I heard it.
I sometimes, say it less polite internally. I say, I'm the garbage bin, because if nobody else, I'm trying to delegate people in their place, and if nobody can solve it, then they throw it at me.
Yeah. So I can't believe how quickly the time is flying, Jan. But I have like 2 more questions for you then. So the first one is, what advice would you give to a younger you?
Yeah, professionally, to be honest, spent more time with family. That would be the honest and simple answer. I've traveled a lot in my career, since COVID, clearly less, but in my current role, but I've always traveled a lot, always been focused on the business. I've always enjoyed my work and my career. But, sometimes I think on hindsight, don't forget the people around you, near you. I've lost my wife to breast cancer a number of years ago. And it's then you start to realize, what's really important in life. And there's been early on in my career, one of my managers, and when I was all worked up about something, and I was working late, and he said, "Hey, but relax. It's only work." And I still remember those phrases. It's only work, and it's a large part of where we spend our time. So it's important, and to think, it's important to think ahead and develop yourself. I've always remembered those phrases also, like, "Hey, it's only work," because then you need to realize, with people around you, how important that is.
Yeah.
Ultimately.
Yeah. It's getting that balance, isn't it, of being doing both. And finally, my final question for you, which is the one I ask everybody that comes onto the podcast: what is the legacy that you want to leave on the world?
That's a big question. It's a very big question. I'm not sure if in the role I have, if I have such a footprint, legacy on the world. But I've always thought, I'm very fortunate that I ended up in medtech. I've been all my career in medtech, and it's an amazing, from end of the 90s, I saw minimal invasive technology coming up, and it's been fascinating. And then also, I've lived from, the European regulations really started to where they are now, and that's been fascinating how they follow technology and all the struggles there. I've tried to translate that, business-wise into pragmatic solutions, and I've touched on, because I've hired a lot of people in my career, and as such, I've influenced people's career by that, and I hope I've got the message across of finding that balance between the regulations are, I think, really important. If you apply them right, it can help businesses, but we have to find a practical way of implementing them, and that's what I use with my words, like not always wanting to build a Rolls Royce to perfection. That's that I can say business-wise where I worked, what the impact was, but ultimately I hope I've helped coach people in the right direction in their career throughout the years. And that's not really a legacy for the world, but that's where I would feel most proud of, that if I help people in the right direction, that they have fulfilling jobs.
And that is a legacy, because I think, you know, like everyone can think back to managers that they've had, great managers that have helped, that have given them that opportunity when nobody else did, or that taught them something that really accelerated their career. And, you know, being one of the good ones who helped to accelerate the people whose lives you had the opportunity to touch, that's something really powerful and compelling. So Jan, it was so interesting having you on and hearing your story. Thank you for sharing all your learnings. I've definitely taken loads away from this episode. To those of you who are listening, don't forget to give this a thumbs up, give it a comment, give it a like, follow the podcast for more episodes of Career Diaries by Elemed. And that's all we have time for. So thank you, Jan, for coming on.